Hey, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and while my first proper Kirby game might have been Superstar, Kirby's Adventure was the first I saw at my cousin's house, and was the reason I wanted a Kirby game so much. And is probably why I felt so cheated when we got Dream Course instead. This pretty much defined what Kirby was to me, a platformer where you could float around and absorb powers to help you out. And while a few other ingredients might have been added in since, that still remains largely true. So while I might have gotten to this one a little late, needing to buy a used copy, Adventure still remains a pretty formative title for me. Let's take a look at why. All at once, everyone in Dreamland stops having dreams. When this is brought to Kirby's attention, he sets out to investigate at the source, the Fountain of Dreams. Upon arriving, he discovers King Dedede has broken the fountain's star rod and given the pieces to his friends. Annoyed, Kirby leaves to retrieve each, fix the star rod, and restore dreams to everybody's sleep. And while that seems straightforward enough, it does establish the trope of most Kirby games having some sort of twist, making it so that the story isn't as simple as it first seems. In this case, spoilers, it turns out that Nightmare, a malevolent being, had infiltrated the fountain to give the citizens bad dreams, and Dedede essentially pulled the plug to protect everyone. This is also when Kirby and Dedede's relationship got a little more complex than just good guy, bad guy. Dedede sometimes being at odds with Kirby, other times helping him, being misunderstood, possessed, or maybe even not being necessarily evil, but just a bit of a jerk. While I'd say he was definitely the antagonist of the first game, here, the line starts getting a little blurred, and while I'd say the two are more friends than enemies, with Dedede being an ally more often than not, you can still never be completely sure what kind of Dedede treatment you're gonna get when you start a Kirby game. Just that he'll probably be there. And you know what? I appreciate that. Teaching kids not to jump to conclusions while also not being too trusting ain't a bad lesson. Kirby can run, jump, and float. Indefinitely. He also gets 6 ticks of health that do not refill in between stages, though victory against the boss comes with a full heal. He can also slide for quick movement, to break blocks, and take out some weaker enemies, most of which take contact damage just like you, and while swimming, he can spit to attack in the 4 cardinal directions. Most significantly though, you can consume enemies to obtain their powers. Hooray! While that seems like a staple, it actually wasn't in the original game, and there's a few oddball ones that don't have the copy ability either, so this is a pretty huge deal. There's also a good bit of variety with them. Some melee, some projectiles, one makes you jump high, and whatever ball is. Can that be used offensively? Some elements even have variations, like how one firepower is a forward dash, another breeze it out in front, and there's 2 for ice, one that freezes around you and another straight, but further ahead. Part of this might be due to how limited each is. While a few might do something a little different in the air, most only do one thing, no directional inputs, so don't try getting cute with it. There's also a few with limited uses. Might can clear a room 3 times, whereas Crash is the same, but does more damage to big enemies and can only be used once. And the UFO, which can fly in either beam or laser, only lasts until the end of a stage. There's a pretty good spread of these throughout the game, and while you might want to swap constantly to keep things fresh, there's also a lot of times when they'll give you a power right before it'll be helpful, so that's another reason to swap. Just be careful though, since you lose your power after getting hit, and while you can reabsorb it, you'll have to chase down the bouncing star that contains it. If you happen to suck in 2 enemies with copy abilities at once, you get a random power through roulette. Also worth noting is that, while most powers will just take out regular enemies, they'll typically do less to bosses and sub-bosses than spitting something back at them. Of course, powers tend to be spammier, whereas you need to wait for a chance to counter if you're looking to upchuck, so there's a definite trade-off for each. While a small thing, I like that which is better isn't so black and white, and allows a little room for strategy and personal preference. And for power-ups, you get the little energy drink bottles to recover 2 ticks of health, Maxim tomatoes for full, extra lives for, well, you know, and the hyper lollipops, often helpfully given to you by Meta Knight for invincibility. And if you ever need more information for your current power, or want to exit a stage you already cleared, there's the pause menu. For stages, you get a series of them divided into 7 worlds. Vegetable Valley, Ice Cream Island, Butter Building, Grape Garden, Yogurt Yard, Orange Ocean, and Rainbow Resort. Well, there's also the Fountain of Dreams, but that's just the two-form final boss rather than levels. And each is mostly just a collection of stages. While Butter Building is mostly traveling in and around said structure, and Orange Ocean has a fair bit of ships and water while being orange, at least until the end when it gets Arctic. For the most part, the levels don't seem to have hard and fast themes. Even when you get a few stages in the clouds and Grape Garden, that mostly just determines what the platforms look like. There's a few times when the end of one area will kind of spill into the first level of the next, which is a good transition and kind of makes it feel like one continuous journey rather than Kirby just bouncing around between random places, and Rainbow Resort has a sub-boss rush and a stage in grayscale styled after the area in the original game, Kirby's Dream Land. But other than the examples I gave you, if you showed me a stage from Adventure, I might have a hard time telling you which world it came from. And to a degree, that's fine. Having a hard and fast theme can kind of limit things, whereas this just lets them throw in an idea where they want. No need to wait until they get to the water area to throw in a water stage, or never use the forest setting again after clearing Vegetable Valley, but it does give each world less of a personality. Though maybe I've just played too much Mario and should shut up. It certainly feels like a nitpick when the levels do tend to be pretty good. Most of them are short, sometimes really short, but there's a good number of secrets packed in. While you can just plow through most stages, you can find a lot of extras like power-ups, helpful abilities, or hidden switches if you keep an eye out. Doors are hidden in the scenery, bigger areas require exploration, and you need to have the right power to open something up at points. Even if you're not going for everything, it can be fun finding stuff and make you feel really clever when you manage to pick out something that at first seemed pretty innocuous. At the end of each stage, indicated by a door with a star above it, you get a quick minigame where you time a button press to determine how high you jump. Upper levels will net you more points for bragging rights, and the tippy top will snag an extra life. That's not the only minigame you get though. In the level select area, you can get some extra doors for these, some of which require flipping a switch in stage to uncover. There's a crane game where you get 2 chances to grab either a small or big Kirby for 1 or 2 extra lives each. Quick Draw has you competing against several enemies in a shootout, and the Egg Catcher has you trying to, well, catch eggs, while avoiding bombs, which eating will end the round immediately. These 2 are for bonus points or extra lives if you do well enough. And so that you can't use them to just infinitely farm lives, they get boarded up once you attempt them. There's also the museum, which you can enter to consume a helpless enemy on display to gain its power, and the arena, where you fight a sub-boss, also for its ability, and a Maxim Tomato. There's also doors to move between areas, if you want to backtrack. There's a good variety of enemies here, probably to account for the fact that they do give you a decent number of copy abilities. Most of the new ones added in became recurring, based largely on when their particular powers are available. Beam and Hammer are pretty standard, so Waddle Doo and Bonkers are in most games, whereas the guys for High Jump and Tornado appear off and on. Waddle Dees, Gordos, and a few others from the original game are also back, though most of them tend to give no powers. Then there's the sub-bosses, which, like Kirby, have health bars but with more segments on it, because different attacks can do different amounts. These tend to alternate between attacking Kirby and chucking things his way that he can send back. Most of them follow specific patterns, so just pay attention. These can also be swallowed after defeat, and while some give basic powers, like Wheel or Fireball, others are unique, like the Throws or Mike, so these are worth trying out for the novelty of it if nothing else. Then there's also Meta Knight's crew, which will come at you in waves. While slightly stronger than a regular enemy, each can be sucked up and used to take out one of their compatriots, which is how I recommend handling them. Then we get the bosses, which, still segmented health bars, but longer. Wispy Woods is still essentially a wall you have to wail on. I guess he can drop things on you and send out puffs of air, though I just kinda stun-locked him, so who knows? Paint Roller skates around between 4 canvases, and whatever they paint will pop out and attempt to attack you, but if you suck it up, you can send it right back, so Roller running into you is the bigger threat. Also, the radio mic can be sucked up for the mic power, so eat that one for some easy damage. Mr. Shine and Mr. Bright take turns facing you, charging your way and sometimes sending projectiles. Whichever is in the back will take pot shots at you, which you can use to counter their partner. Kracko is the same as always, lightning and dashing around, occasionally sending out a smaller enemy for you to use, but jumping into him is the more fun way to take him out in my opinion. Heavy Mole is a mining machine that will dig in random directions, sometimes crowding you, and send a missile out from its rear hatch. Since it needs to be open to do so, there's always enough warning, but given that it can also dig up and down, you sometimes don't have a floor to land on after catching one, so this is probably the fight that I'd recommend having a power for the most. And Meta Knight does the thing that he will always do, both here and forever after, insisting that you use a sword because he wants a fair fight. Except he hits harder, you need to get close to attack with it, and you're the only one who takes contact damage, and he's probably just, in general, better at using it than you are. Honorable my ass. It's like if we were to play Smash and I insist on a Mega Man mirror match. That's my main. Though at least you get to keep the sword for the whole fight. King DDD swings a hammer, sucks you up, and throws his weight around, and has a good bit of HP. He feels a little RNG based since whether he attacks you with something that'll give you a star to send back or not can be kinda fickle. Sometimes you can counter, others you'll be waiting a bit. This is another one where a power isn't a bad idea. Just keep your distance so that you have enough time to see what he's doing. Then there's Nightmare, which starts out as a ball that'll send projectiles your way, while you use the Star Rod to do the same. It's kinda set up like an arcade shooter because Kirby always needs at least one of those. This thing can take a beating and there's also a time limit before the ground rushes up to crush you, so be aggressive. Then you get his more humanoid form, where he teleports, flies around, and sends out projectiles, though you can knock some of those out of the air with the Star Rod. To hurt him, you need to hit him specifically in the weird little staticky lower half of his body, which he can block with his cloak, so it's a matter of waiting for him to be open and then attacking. With both forms, it's a little weird since you're locked into a power, and it isn't really the same as anything else in the game, but they can be pretty fun when you get them down. Overall, you got a pretty good stable of enemies here. Just try to get a good feel for the bigger baddies so that you can determine whether you want to fight them naked, with a specific power, or just anything you can attack consistently with. The game looks cute. A part of me wants to be a bit harsh with the sprites, saying they look a little rough, but I think that might be because Superstar was a bigger part of my childhood, and of course this sort of thing is going to look dated in retrospect. I think Adventure does a good job of taking the original Game Boy title and translating it for the bigger and more colorful screen. Speaking of, most things do have a pleasant color scheme, with a few that are really striking and pop. And I love this effect they do with Butter Building, where the tower spins as you move around it, even when... No, especially when it doesn't make sense given the shape of the structure. If I can voice a complaint though, the different layers on the screen don't always communicate what they need to. There have been times where I've confused the background for foreground, or platforms I can drop through for the one-way ones. A few might be intentional. This is a game that does things like hide doors in the shadows of objects, and it's never gotten me killed. I've been able to figure things out by bumping up against them, or just by memory, but it can still be a little annoying. Back to the positive though, most enemy attacks are this orangish sort of color, and some of yours have the same, like Sword, so it's typically pretty easy to tell what's a hurt box. The UI is also good. It gives you pretty much all the info you could want, your current health, your extra lives, and a cute little portrait of whatever power you happen to have at the time. And as a special note, the little skits at the start of each world return, with the first one showing Kirby using the copy ability, which is a good way to teach players, even if they skip the instruction manual. Speaking of, if you sit on the start screen long enough, not only will you be told how to draw Kirby, but also be given a quick rundown of your moves and some of the copy powers available. And during the credits, you're shown how to tackle some bosses with abilities that you normally wouldn't think to bring with you, so I can't fault the game for presentation. The OST is great. While still on the NES, most of the tracks seem to work within the hardware's capabilities rather than be limited by them, and honestly, I don't think there's a bad song here. Whether peppy, relaxing, tense, or even a bit mysterious, listening to any of these, with or without the game, makes me happy and want to sing along. Which is hard because there's no lyrics. It's almost a shame since I think this OST belongs right next to Dreamlands and Superstars, yet it doesn't seem like we get as many remixes. Though at least we got Butter Building and Smash. I'm gonna say that, while not the easiest platformer I've ever played, it's still on the lower end of difficulty. There's a part of me that hesitates to do this, but I think that's just because I originally played Adventure when I was fairly young, inexperienced, and with limited TV time to practice with. But when I managed to get through it in 2 hours, no game overs with more than 20 lives, I can't exactly call it a wall. There's a few parts that are challenging, when the game's pretty liberal with enemies and spikes, where you walk into a room that you'd really wish you brought a power for, Meta Knight fighting you on his terms, and you starting the stage with whatever damage you previously took, rather than getting a refresh. But even when you do die, you typically only go back to the last door you walked through, so the penalties are still pretty mild. And while they won't choke you with them, there's normally at least one maximum tomato per stage, to say nothing of the bottles and 1-ups, with bonus games between stages on top of that. Plus, it's a platforming game where you can stay in the air for as long as you want. I think less experienced players will be challenged, but should be able to muddle through, especially with stave states and rewinds, but veterans will likely stomp this. There's always the 100% though. I think I did this as a kid, but I haven't managed it on NSO. Maybe I should have before I did this review, though to get it, rather than discover everything, you just need to find and flip all the hidden switches. Not every stage will have one, and after clearing a level, you'll plant a flag next to it and the door will turn white if there's nothing left to do there, so it's pretty easy to give yourself a little checklist. Given how well some things are hidden, heck, some I even see and just can't seem to piece together what I need, this actually would be a good extra challenge, assuming you don't just look it up. Though even then, some of these might require something crazier than I'm imagining. Getting the 100 unlocks the extra game, which halves your max health and doesn't allow you to save, which sounds awful, but beat that and unlock the sound test. Though I already downloaded the OST, so... Okay, there's not much motivation for doing 100%, but there is always bragging rights and something extra for those who want the challenge. For regular playthroughs though, it's not too Herculean an effort. So there you go, Kirby's Adventure. It's still a good game, and while it might not be the hardest, it's still worth a play. It also really solidified the Kirby formula, and was the entry that got me into the series, even if it wasn't the first I laid hands on. Or to put it even more plainly, it's a recommend. So go ahead, live a little, treat yourself to a pleasant evening of Kirby, and wiggle along to the soundtrack. That's enough out of me though, what do you think? Have you played this one? Did you enjoy it? I'm not off on the difficulty thing, right? And what's your favorite copy ability? Mine's Fireball, at least in this one. That'll do it for this week, so thanks as always for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into retro games, especially platformers. Right back at ya! Yeah!